Today, our unit will be on understanding decimals. For the past few weeks, we've been working on understanding whole numbers, and now it is time to learn decimals, which are parts of the wholes we've been working with. So to begin, we're going to review place value for the whole numbers. In the past few weeks, we have been working on a place value chart, which has started being read from the right to the left, starting with the ones column, moving to the tens, the hundreds, and the thousands. And we've actually learned far more than just the thousands place. We've moved to 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, all the way up to the billions. Again, that's moving from the right to the left. Now we throw a decimal point in there. This decimal point tells us that we no longer just have a whole piece that we're working with, we have parts of a whole that haven't quite yet met the status of being a whole. So we've talked in class about how these are little parts, pieces, bits. Maybe if we're talking about food, it could be crumbs or the leftovers that aren't quite a full piece. And for fourth grade this year, we're only going to learn two place values past the decimal point, that being the tenths and the hundredths. When we talk about numbers now, we need to be very specific and clear in how we pronounce the words because they sound very similar to the place values over here to the left. We have the tenths and the hundredths. We have to be careful that THS makes a huge difference. It tells us that it's actually a small piece, a decimal, or a fraction of the whole. So I want you to look and see if you notice a pattern here and what can you infer the next place value box will be. So if I'm looking here, I see the ones column, which I'm very familiar with. We've been working with the ones column for many years now in school. And to the left, I have tens, hundreds, and thousands. So if you see the pattern, I have a decimal point. I only have one ones column, and I have tenths and hundredths. Notice that it moves from tens here, tenths over here, hundreds here, hundredths over here. So what can you infer based off of this that the next column would be? Hopefully you have said thousandths, and that would be correct. Okay, in a sense, the rest are like reflections. They bounce back and forth with each other, with the left being the place values we already know, and the decimals being parts of those wholes where we add the THS to represent that fact. One helpful thought that I've talked about in class is that there's one and only one ones place. Okay, the ones place does not show up again. There is no such thing as the ones place. Okay, there just isn't any such thing in decimals. There's only one and only one, a decimal point, and then we start reflecting back and forth. Okay, we want to remember that a decimal is part of a whole, so the more numbers to the right of that decimal point, the smaller the pieces are going to be. So if you have 4.56, that is 4 wholes and 56 out of 100 little pieces. How I know that is I have a 4 before the decimal point. Anything before the decimal point tells me it's a whole number. So I have 4 whole numbers. The decimal point allows me to say the word and. So I say 4 and, I read the number, 56, and then I say the place value it's in, hundredths. That's how far out it moves. So that means there are 56 out of 100 little pieces. Since they're little pieces or decimals, I add the THS. So I would say this number here as 4 and 56 hundredths. Okay, let's relate this to money. I often think that it's easiest for you to understand with money first, simply because we've been working with money for a long time now, and that's something we're pretty familiar with. It's in everyday life. So let's say I have the amount of money of $3.24. Okay, that means I'm going to have 3 separate $1 bills. Then I will have 2 dimes and 4 pennies. that equates to 3 wholes, 2 tenths, because it's worth 10 cents and 10 cents, and those dimes haven't yet met the status of being a whole dollar. So 2 in the 10th spot, notice the 2 is in the 10th spot, and then 4 hundredths, because it's 4 small pennies that haven't yet met the status of a whole dollar, and we say the THS, the th part, because they are parts of a dollar, or in this case, parts of a whole. So we have 3 wholes, 2 tenths, 24 hundredths come together to be 3.24. 2 in the tenths and 4 in the hundredths place. So let's take this same idea and transfer it to base 10 blocks. Okay. Now, I have 3 wholes to represent my $3, so I would shade all of those in. I have the whole base 10 block. I have another whole base 10 block. So right now that would be like having $2. Now I have 3 whole base 10 blocks. That would be like having 3 wholes. And remember, I had 2 tenths. So I'm going to shade in 2 tens columns. That's 1 tenth, and that's 2 tenths. Now, with the pennies, remember I had 4. This is out of 100, so I'm going to color in 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 wholes and 24 hundredths. To break that down, it would be 3 wholes, 2 tenths, and 4 hundredths. Now, we also have to be able to represent decimals with base 10 blocks like I just did. So if I take a base 10 block, I can break it down into 10 rods or 100 units. Do you see how both add up to 100? Here are my 2 different depictions. I can take this hundreds grid and I can break it up into 10 columns of 10 that make 100, or I could also look at it as 100 tiny boxes. So this is how we would represent 2 tenths, and this is how we would represent 4 hundredths. Notice here how I have the same value, but we will read them slightly differently. They are the exact same size box. One I have broken down into 10 tens rods, and the other I have broken up into 100 unit cubes. They both equal 100, which is our whole. This represents 6 tenths because I have 6 10 rods shaded, and this represents 60 hundredths because I have 60 units shaded in. These are the same value. Okay, they equal the same amount. Once they are both full up to the top with blue, they will now become wholes, and they've met that status of being a whole. One last piece of information is a common misconception with students, and that is how to represent 1 tenth and 1 hundredth. In looking at the first visual representation, I have taken the hundredths chart and I have broken it down into 10 columns of 10. I've shaded in 1. What the value for this in a decimal is 1 tenth. I show that as 0 wholes. I don't have a whole box shaded in. Decimal point and 1 tenth. because I have shaded in a tens column. That is a lot different than having the same sized box, breaking it down into 100 little pieces and shading in 1. I have 1/100th. I have 0 whole boxes shaded, a decimal point, 0 tens column shaded. See, I don't have anything that looks like that. And I have 1 little box. So what you can see here very clearly that 1/10 is greater than 1/100th.